All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here in 2024 preview and prediction for the Arizona State Sun Devils. Looking at this coaching staff, Kenny Dillingham, 3-9 debut season, previously OC at Oregon. And, of course, he's going to reunite with Marcus Arroyo, who was at Oregon previously, head coach at UNLV for a couple seasons. And then Brian Ward enters his second year in the role as defensive coordinator. They've done plenty of portal work since Dillingham has arrived. Lost 6 games by double figures last season, though. Not showing much fight from this football team. You look at the offensive side, it was just a complete disaster despite having some pretty respectable talent. You had a former high-end recruit in Jaden Rashada, a nice tight end in Jalen Conyers, Elijah Badger, and they just weren't able to really execute much, only putting up about 18 points per game. The QB play was pretty embarrassing, and I'm really not convinced they're going to be any better here. Plenty of turnover in this room as you have numerous guys transfer out. Sam Levitt, though, comes in from Michigan State. Accurate, mobile passer with a big arm. A lot of upside. 6'2", 200, bit undersized. They had Jeff Sims, who's shown limited passing ability, and to really have just horrid ball security. Great abilities as a runner, though, with speed and elusiveness. Trenton Bourget had a few good games last season. Was probably the best starter for them. Still had some tough outings, though. The Rashada thing didn't work out, Nick. I don't think people really cared about that anyways. Drew Pine, he was only able to stay on the field for 2 games. Was injured all year long. Really didn't play much better himself, even though he was really just one start against USC. I feel like they probably could have did better if Pine stayed on the field. All those guys are out, though, Nick, and now you bring in a guy in Sam Levitt I think will be a respectable starter, but still, an uphill climb considering he doesn't have much experience.
Just a mess of a quarterback room last year. They went through 3 different quarterbacks that really could not seem to figure out what was going to be the key to lead this team. I thought Drew Pine would have been a solid quarterback for this team. He had 2 picks and 3 interceptions in 2 games. Didn't really play a whole lot. Rashada, that was a whole mess. Obviously, a lot of smoke and mirror. A lot of stuff going on the off the field with him as well. And then when they have their one starter, Trenton Bourget, who played 8 games for them, about 1,500 yards passing, 1 touchdown to 4 interceptions. Not a great showing from him in 8 games. He's still on the roster. He's down there towards the bottom of the quarterback depth chart behind Sims, who had a miserable year at Nebraska, continuously turned the ball over. I think he fumbled the ball 4 times in one game. Just a complete mess after previously having a decent time at Georgia Tech. And then Sam Levitt is the guy at the top of the depth chart right now who was at Michigan State, who comes over. I think he's got some potential here. I don't think he's going to be a superstar or anything, but I do think he's a decent quarterback that you can plug in at this point in time as they try to figure out where to go from here. Dillingham has his work cut out trying to find the next quarterback in the desert. I think this is a solid bridge guy for now because they really need to find somebody soon, potentially out of the portal or as a freshman.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a bridge guy. I think he'll be the starter for a couple of seasons here. A lot of eligibility left for him. Well, how good will he be, and will he even last at Arizona State due to some bumpy roads ahead early on is the real question. I do think he'll be a starter a couple of seasons here, though. Looking at the running back room, Cameron Scadaboo, a guy we talked about last year, coming over from Sacramento State. He's an Evan Holt-type player. Remember him from Northwestern, a versatile, elusive, downhill, compact runner. Good vision. Inconsistent ball security, though. Very physical player, though, at 5'10", 225. He was a productive asset for them. Really showcased some of his skills with, 9 rushing touchdowns, 783 on the ground. Relatively the same group as last year, as Scadaboo is going to be pairing up with DeCarlos Brooks as the number 2. Only played 5 games last year. Was injured throughout the season. Also more of a power back at 220 pounds. They did add some nice players, though. A high upside player in Relic Brown, next 5-star from USC. Things didn't work out there in LA. Strong athletic profile, though, with great speed and versatility. Kyson Brown, they return him. Only got a few touches a season ago. And then Alt McGaskill. This guy was highly productive as a freshman at Houston in 2021, then tore his ACL. Previously transferred from Colorado after only a few touches there in Boulder. I think if McGaskill could certainly get back to what he was able to accomplish in Houston, where I think it was like 16 rushing touchdowns he had as a freshman and 1,000 yards, then this could be a really good around ground game, Nick. What do you make of this backfield? It really does stand out.
I like Scadaboo. He's probably my favorite player on this team. A very fun player to watch, underrated player. Definitely has those comparisons to Evan Holt, like you mentioned, a guy I like a lot. I think Scadaboo is a really solid player, 783 yards rushing, 4.8 yards per attempt, and 9 scores from last year, as well as 24 grabs for 286 yards and a touchdown out of the backfield. A nice dual threat sort of capability there. I like him a lot. I think DeCarlos Brooks is an underrated back in this new conference that they find themselves in. He only played in 5 games with 259 rushing yards, 5.4 yards per carry, and 3 scores for him in those limited appearances. So I do think there are some high upside here. I think if this team's going to want to be competitive, they're going to have to run the ball a lot with these 2 backs that are going to lead the way for this team.
You look at the wide receiver room. Again, a unit last year I thought was pretty deep, but they just didn't perform very well due to the quarterback limitations, and of course they didn't certainly play up to their potential at times either. The production was incredibly horrid. Xavier Gilroy, though, a guy I think can really step up. I think it was Idaho State, the FCS school he played at. Transferred over last year, a guy with great speed, really pulls away after the catch. Quick feet allows him to win off his release. Great focus to win contested catches. I still think those are attributes you can showcase this season. Troy O'Meary, a smooth route runner with strong hands, an ex-pass catcher with not much speed or yak abilities. Milquan Stovall played the most slot reps of anyone on the team, but didn't see many targets. Jake Smith, a thinner frame slot that hasn't caught a pass since 2020 and appears to be in line for some reps. All three being players who have been in college for a long time but have never really been that great. I think Jordan Tyson, though, is a guy who can really emerge as a deep threat. He was good for Colorado 2 years ago, but suffered a torn ACL, so didn't play last season, which was unfortunate for him, as he was a real explosive playmaker. Also get Caleb Black back, a 3-star from last year's class, who could provide some speed as well. So I think there's some interesting pieces like Black and Tyson, Nick. The guys at the top of the depth chart, though, again, they've been around college football for a couple of years, and they've never really did much, and that's certainly concerning.
Certainly is concerning when you look at the lack of production at their various schools. I think Gilroy is a solid player, was pretty good at Idaho State, and now he had a decent season last year. Wasn't incredible. He was their fourth leading pass catcher, 226 yards receiving, 10.8 yards per grab, and 1 score. The top returning receiver behind Scadaboo, who is their top returning receiver in terms of true production. Troy O'Meary as well, 223 yards receiving, 11.2 yards per grab, 3 scores for him. And Stovall, 207 yards receiving and 11.5 yards for him. No scores for the last one there. Some other solid players, I think Smith could be a guy that could be not too bad for this unit. Caleb Black showed some promise as a true redshirt freshman. That is a guy that could be solid for this team. This is not a terrible unit, not a whole lot of production on the paper, but I think these are some guys that could surprise some people in the Big 12.
Tight end room has some depth as well. FSU transfer Marcuston Douglas at 6'5", 280. Cameron Harpole from San Diego State. Neither have been really pass-catching threats. Coveted recruit in Jaden Fortier. Should see a good amount of time on the field. And then a pretty shocking addition in Shimon Mateer, a good pass catcher from Cincinnati last year. So, they've got some good depth, but a lot of these players just seem to be ones that nobody else really wanted in the portal. You look at the offensive line, this was a unit that wasn't all that bad, but they played with a lot of different players. Joshua Atkins started all year long at left tackle for Hawaii last year, 888 snaps, allowed 7 sacks, but that's a team who's going to drop back a ton and was good at times and should be an asset on the ground. Only 6'4", 290, though. He's in a battle with Bram Walden, though, who saw nearly 400 snaps and allowed only 1 sack. Left guard was a revolving door, but the return of Ben Coleman, who was expected to be a big player for them last year, transferring in from Cal before a preseason injury derailed his momentum, is going to be key for them. Levi Fotanu returns as starting center. He was quite average, but at 6'2", 320, I think he can keep progressing. Right guard also saw numerous faces. Added Joey Sua, 6'4", 346 from Arkansas. He was in the program for only 1 season. Sean Naa figures to be the starter, but was horrid at left guard last year. And I don't think right tackle is much better. Max Incanor was pretty bad in his 6 games. Emmett Bull figured to be the starter, but got hurt after a good week 1. So they're hopeful that this position will be in much better standing. I think this offensive line can really take some strides with better health and experience. Again, Bull and Coleman, Nick, 2 starters that I think would have been probably the best on this unit. They were hurt very early on in the year. They didn't get to showcase much one bit. This year, if they can stay on the field, I think it'll pay big dividends.
I think Coleman and Bull are 2 very key players for this offensive line. I thought Bull was a really solid player at the FCS level, and then Coleman was solid at Cal. Those 2 injuries really hurt them. I think both of them will be solid. Coleman's a really good player at left guard. I think the left tackle, adding Atkins, really does strengthen up that left side from Hawaii. I think the 2 of them together are a really solid combo, a very nice unit there on that left side. The right side, the interior, worries me a little bit more, but I think that if you have Bull out there in the right tackle position, that should be all right. At the center position, I am a little worried about as well with right guard, but I do think this is an offensive line unit that is trending in the right direction over time.
Looking at the verdict for the Sun Devils offense, they should have been much better than they were last year, but horrid QB play really drained the entire unit. And, I'm not certain it'll be any better this year, but Levitt should have a longer leash and have some quality players around him. And that includes an offensive line to take some respectable steps forward. Unit should see some nice increases in production, I would say. Will certainly want to be to a marginal degree is what's expected. Look at the defensive side of the ball, a unit that I already knew would take a massive step back a couple of years ago. This was a sound unit, but they just lost too many key players in Dillingham's first season. They fell apart completely, far cry from what they were in 2021. 109th in scoring defense. They returned only 3 starters. They only had 5 interceptions. They did have 26 sacks, though, and that's due to a nice pass rushing duo led by Clayton Smith, a guy who finally saw some action, provided some production, but really wasn't that good and missed lots of tackles, but he is a former high-end recruit. There still has some upside from Oklahoma. Prince Dorbah, on the other hand, was a really good add from Texas. Was a nice player versus the run, second best pass rusher on the team. Alongside them, coming off the edge, added Roman Pitry from Purdue. Only one snap last year for the Boilers. Elijah O'Neal was less than stellar in his good amount of reps. Someone will need to step up with BJ Green's departure. When you look at the interior defensive line, CJ Fight was good, a nice 315-pound run stopper. Anthony Cooper saw nearly 200 snaps in 6 games. Wasn't great, but as a veteran 285-pounder. Justin Woodley has been a good rotational piece for Cincinnati over the past couple of seasons. Jacob Kanakia wasn't a bad player for the rival Wildcats last year, but another 285-pound player. I think the addition of Jeff Clark, a guy who's been a good run defender in his career, was very impactful for Louisville last season. Georgia State early on in his career. Not a bad unit here. We're pretty sound for the most part versus the run outside of the Utah game, where it was just a complete blemish, Nick. They got absolutely demolished in that game late in the year against the Utes for 352 yards and 3 scores and a 52-point loss in Salt Lake City. I mean, it's kind of promising having Smith and Dorbah coming from those rival schools on the Red River, Nick. Other than that, though, we're going to have to see some other guys on the edge step up. I think they have some nice leadership on the interior to be at least solid against the run yet again.
Dorbah and Smith were two really solid adds. Dorbah, probably your best defensive returning player right now in terms of what he can do potentially in the backfield. 30 total tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks for him. Really good numbers from Dorbah. And Smith, 21 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks for him. Plus CJ Fight pitched another 15 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. And Anthony Cooper had 12 tackles in 6 games. Last year, decent, nice depth there. Jeff Clark's a really solid veteran that they can bring out of the portal. Elijah O'Neal had 11 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, plus a half a sack last year. Some other players, Roman Pitry, I think he's a really solid add out of the portal, a guy that is looking for a new opportunity after not really playing at all for Purdue, but a guy I think that has high upside potentially and a nice solid add there. I think this is a unit that's probably the best part of the unit on this defense. Some really solid players here. They will be able to get after the quarterback and have a solid pass rush. But the run defense is the question. Can they be good against the run? Because they were pretty solid last year. If they can keep up that same momentum, I think this will be a pretty good front part of this defense.
You look at the middle of this defense, they do add 2 respectable transfers. Keyshawn Elliott from New Mexico State. He's going to be a leader here. He was a stat sheet stuffer, 111 tackles, 10 TFL, had 6 pass breakups. Did miss the third most tackles in FBS with 27, though, and seemed to be a liability in coverage, so certainly plenty to work on for him. Cyrus Fiasu provided similar impact for San Diego State. Leading tackler, has also had 11 tackle for loss, 5 pass breakups, missed a lot of tackles, failed to really provide stability and coverage. So you're getting 2 ends of the sword here with 2 different players, Nick, that can really help you beef up what you do in terms of producing negative plays. Might also give up some big ones as well. Tate Romney played a lot of snaps last year. Was quite poor in all facets. Should improve as he was a true freshman. Caleb McCullough, the veteran, was better and more consistent. Solid group here. Should see better play overall with much improved experience, but they would be in some real issue if they didn't add these 2 transfers, Nick. They also added another one in Jordan Crook, so they definitely tried to beef this area up from Arkansas, but he doesn't have much experience to his name either. But Elliott and Fiasu, these guys are going to be massive for this defense.
Keyshawn Elliott, a really solid add. You highlighted the large number of tackles, 111 total tackles for New Mexico State, and then Fiasu as well from San Diego State, leading tackler for them and really solid. But he does miss a lot of tackles. Really good coverage asset, though. I think he's going to be more of your coverage guy there. In terms of the 2 players that they returned back in this linebacking unit, Caleb McCullough and Tate Romney, they both had 52 total tackles and 4 tackles for loss and 1 sack for each of them. Romney was a little bit better in coverage with the 4 pass breakups. This is a unit that's certainly in transition by adding 2 pieces out of the portal. Jordan Crook was an add. They added a piece they added as well. I want to see what he looks like. He didn't really do a whole lot of Arkansas, but he's a guy that has SEC experience, at least in practice. This is a unit that's getting better slowly over time. I think the coverage from them will be pretty solid this year, but I'm a little worried about the tackling capabilities.
Now you look at the secondary unit that was just disastrous last year, 123rd against the pass. They allowed 990 yards over the final 2 games, and again, they only forced 5 interceptions. They lose some key starters, some players that were actually, I thought, pretty respectable. CB group was really in flux, though. They added LaTerrence Welch, who only played about 150 snaps in 2 years for LSU. Other side's Javan Robinson, who was pretty poor in 6 games for Washington State. Does reunite with his defensive coordinator, though. Keith Abney, a player they feel confident in. Safety group is in good standing, I'd say. Shamari Simmons was pretty horrid in coverage, but was a good tackler, really impressive in run defense. Xavier Alford hasn't touched the field since 2021, but could provide some solid reps, I think. Miles Rouser from Mexico State. He was an elite player for the Aggies, has good versatility, should be a patroller, like the player here for them. They also add X5 star Kamari Wilson from Florida after not seeing much action for the Gators. Cole Martin was a solid player in his brief time with Oregon last year. Should fill in the slot after losing a good player, Jordan Clark. Mason Williams, a veteran who saw 100-plus snaps, will be in contention as well. Again, Nick, the secondary played with complete, disregard for life, it seemed, last year with how bad they were over the final 2 games. 12 passing touchdowns, almost 1,000 yards over the final 2, that being Oregon and Arizona. Doesn't matter who you're playing, Nick. You guys got torched like that. It's got to change. That's just embarrassing. And again, they lose some pretty solid players. Ed Woods departs for Michigan State. Ro Torrance is gone. Bad news bears here for Arizona State, or does this safety group give you some hope?
They absolutely got torched last year. I was saying that their run defense wasn't too bad last year, and it really was a solid unit, 38th in the nation against the run, 133 yards per game, but 123rd in the nation against the pass, 263 pass yards per game given up, 31.8 points per game given up. A lot of that is due to the fact that they could not defend the pass at all, and this is certainly a big issue. But when you bring in new players, you can only go up from there. I think Simmons, returning him as the only piece they return, is solid because he was the team's top tackler with 73 total tackles and 6 pass breakups, but he is a liability in coverage. Just a really good tackler, though, a really solid player that is a hard hitter. They brought in a lot of different pieces from the portal that you rattled off there. I think Rouser's a really solid add there. Wilson's another decent add. This is a whole new unit, which they really needed considering how poor they were last year. I'm just not expecting a huge jump up. Maybe they get, cut down that total a little bit. Maybe you cut it down 10, 15 yards per game. But right now, I do not think this unit has had enough of a progress forward with the pieces they've added.
I think the safety group can be really impressive, but depth right now at corner doesn't seem great. You got 3 transfers coming in trying to fill voids, and again, the depth still isn't all that pristine. So, verdict for this side of the ball, the Sun Devils front 6 and 7 should take some steps forward with some nice transfers, and the run defense wasn't all that bad, but the linebacking group will need to be more consistent and be enforcers. Well, the secondary seems primed to get even worse than it was a season ago after losing a variety of good starters. Leading us to the 24 preview and prediction for the schedule. Arizona State's offense is likely to be better than it was a year ago, as I think we'll see the supporting cast click a little bit more around Sam Leavitt, who should be respectable, but if QB play stays the same, this team will just struggle to win even a game. Sun Devils D step back big time as expected, now lose some high-end players, but another year in the system should benefit them slightly despite all the new transfers. This is going to be a rough season for Arizona State. I think on paper they're certainly better than what we're projecting at 3-9, including a Friday night loss at Texas State, a very good offense there. But it's just the reality of it, Nick. This is a tough schedule. It's really hard to pinpoint many victories. I really don't know who I would be confident in saying they can pick off. At home, Kansas or Utah? No. UCF? I'm really not going to say that either. I think BYU will be a solid one there, as they probably can manage that offense a little bit more. I think even at home against Wyoming week 1, that one's in doubt. Mississippi State, another game that's probably going to be very questionable. 2 teams are going to be pretty poor this year. It's possible this team doesn't win a game, Nick. I really don't want to say that because I think Dillingham's putting in some great work, and I think bowl eligibility is in their future. But this year is going to be rough. And again, on paper, they're better than this, but they're just not going to be able to produce victories.
I hate to say that, not winning any games is very much in the cards. Like you just said there, I do hate to say that because you really don't want to pick on a fan base for a team that has a great head coach. I think Dillingham, one of the youngest, if not the youngest head coach in college football, is an incredible player. Went to Arizona State. They hired him as a former alum. So that's a pretty cool thing to do, to bring back a guy that went to your school to coach there, had great ties, coached at Florida State, coached at Auburn, coached at Oregon. I think he is heading in the right direction, building a really solid offense. But this is just a team that's continuing to be in transition right now, facing a tough schedule. Even the non-conference schedule is really tough when you think about it. At Texas State, we have them both. I have them losing that game as well on the road on a Friday night. It's a very good offense. Mississippi State, that's a team from the SEC you're playing. I know they're probably the worst team in the SEC outside of Vanderbilt, but that's still an SEC opponent that did beat you last year. And then you also have Wyoming on the schedule, who's no joke, coming out of the lower tier in the Mountain West, a team that is still really solid playing up there in Wyoming. We have them beating BYU as well, a team that's also kind of trying to figure some things out up there in Provo, Utah. This is going to be a tough year, certainly, but I do think you got to keep the faith this moment in time, because I think they are heading in the right direction. I think they're bringing in the right pieces, making the portal work. I do think the Sun Devils will be a solid team in a couple years' time. They had a lot of work to do after Herm Edwards left the team in a mess with, NCAA violations and players that were, big misses, big name players ended up having great careers at different programs, and all that happened out there in the desert. I do think, give it some time, and this program will be just fine.
That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me talking about Arizona State. Very nice part of the country. Great campus, great stadium, and we certainly wish they could play some more winning football.
Gorgeous place. I was just out there recently. Incredible town, incredible area out there in the desert. Very beautiful campus. And like I said, just trust the process here. They're building and they'll figure it out in the future.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.